I'd like to invite the morning speakers down to the front for a question and answer session. And we've asked Dennis to be the moderator. And as we did yesterday, please use the microphones so that we can continue with the live streaming.
Great. Do we have a question for anyone? Yes, Mark?
John? Yes. What is your price point for the InterSleek product compared to other products out there, or do you even have a direct competitor for that product?
Well, we have a lot of direct competitors in the market for InterSleek, and there's various different, if you want to call it, grades of InterSleek. So there's like an entry level InterSleek, and then there's a high end, but they can range over per gallon over $300 a gallon for the high end.
That's how you make your money back for all the services.
Well, it's kind of like drugs. You invest a lot of money into developing the drugs, but then the coating lasts so long that you may not make the money back in the future.
Yes, right.
I had a question for you, actually. I see that it's the last line on your last slide. I was wondering what the implications, or have you been speaking with boat designers and builders in a sort of cradle-to-cradle spirit, or in the spirit of cradle-to-cradle, to say, is there anything that could be done without sacrificing the integrity of vessels, but that make them a little bit easier to handle at the end of their life?
Well, one thing we know right now is that the carbon fiber boats being built are very easily recycled. Carbon fiber has a value, used carbon fiber, of over $1 a pound. Ground fiberglass is barely a penny a pound. So we've got one that's virtually no value, the other very high value. Of course, carbon fiber construction is 10 times more expensive than fiberglass construction. But one way to certainly make sure that goes on is to see more vessels made out of carbon fiber. With Boeing building the Dreamliner out of carbon fiber, they're actually sending $1 million a year to the University of Nottingham in England to figure out best ways to recycle those entire aircraft when they get to the end of their life cycle, because the European Union rules require that any new product introduced into the Union have a plan for end of life. We think in the European market they're getting very close to requiring all new vessels in Europe being built with a bond built in, basically a performance bond, that at end of life you cash in the bond. The original buyer of the boat will buy a bond for, say, $5,000 for a 45-foot boat, which will be available to the boat dismantler to tear the boat apart. So we're seeing a very significant effort there to put the burden on the purchaser, the new product purchaser. Our problem is we have a standing inventory of millions of boats to get rid of that have never paid into any kind of a fund. So, when you look at the numbers today, in terms of large sailboats, we sold hundreds in the United States last year of new boats because the old boats aren't going away. And anyway.
Barry, I have a question for you as well. One of the other big problems with boat manufacturing, fiberglass boat manufacturing, is creation of the actual molds and plugs themselves. And we use a lot of 5-axis milling machines. They create a plug for the mold with large volumes of foam, and then it's an equal disposal problem. What do you do with the foam? Seems to me that you can almost solve one problem with the other. Can you grind up boats to use as sort of some sort of a foam product in the actual manufacturing, because we don't need it structurally. We just need large volumes of basically material that we, again, cut away. Seems like one that's worth exploring.
Good idea from a guy who does a lot of innovating. I'll take that under advisement. Thank you very much. That's a good idea. Yes, Eric. Microphone. What? Yes.
Yeah. I was harping yesterday about the beauties and science of wooden boat construction. I'm not doing this out of some nostalgia trip or wild-eyed philosophizing, but because of the fundamental sustainable nature of carbon growing, then recycling, decomposition, the whole thing. What you're talking about in Rhode Island explicitly emphasized great tax benefits to build fiberglass boats in the state. I mean, this is a dedicated national policy so far. It's ironic that you're now being haunted by that very usually taxpayer-funded industrial stimulus. University of Bristol or Bath in the United Kingdom, they did an analysis of the relative carbon footprint of boat building materials. And fiberglass solid core, steel, aluminum ain't the green ones, that's for sure. What I did launch last summer in Gloucester is a 39-foot long boat that is a combination of 90% sustainably sourced North American farm-grown wood, Douglas fir plywood, not pretty, but it works, and then 10% fossil fuel-based synthetic stuff to extend the life of that wood for hopefully 30, 40 years. So by the time I'm done with that boat recycling it, I can ruin it just enough at the surface to make the wood rot, and what I'm left with is 10% of the debris field that you're facing. And that project was done one-off, no mold construction, no CNC machining, who knows where, somewhere, and, never mind. And we did it there in full public view to show that in America's oldest seaport, we can build 21st century monocoque structures, but that are actually 90%, give or take by weight, sustainably sourced. So there's a big subtle hint with a billy club here that if we don't want to have a landfill fight with Pennsylvania sitting in Rhode Island, there may be a chance to be much greener than our good friends from the high carbon and high fiberglass guild may suggest. They said to us decades ago, this wooden boat is all very silly and you might want to get into the future. Well, we are in the future. And this doesn't look so good. So again, coming back to the mission of this, we're the university here, I want to re-emphasize that we don't see any leadership on the academic level and the federal regulatory level to emphasize sustainability principles by both design, construction, structural attributes, and long-term maintenance, and so on and so forth. There seem to be no political or economic or ecological rewards perceived, even though there are plenty. And the next generation will be way smarter, but they will condemn this thing. They will condemn this. This throwaway mentality, cranking out hundreds of boats every other moon phase, but we don't know where they end up. That's a mess.
Thank you. Eric had a question.
Yeah, this is for Ms. Brake. I'm thinking about your corporate social responsibility, and how do you share that? How do you communicate that with the various stakeholders across the brands of Carnival, and also with those that are coming, your guests that are coming on board the ship?
Well, because we do now have 9 brands under one entity, one of the main things that we've been working towards is creating one set of policies and procedures, and that's what we're doing on a corporate level. So we're now developing, we've essentially finished it for all of the environmental aspects, and that's something that then we take those procedures and they're implemented across all the brands. As well as for guests, we do provide them, depending on the ship and their brand, they do it in different ways. Many of them will have pamphlets that they provide to those guests that come on board that explain all of the environmental impacts they may have and what they can do to really reduce those. As well as some of them are a little bit greener, where they have actual TVs set up around the ship that explain this information, as well as there's different events that are on board depending on the brand and how they implement it. So we do allow a little bit of personality for each brand because they do have different consumers, they do have different guests from different locations. So it's kind of always implemented, but the way that they do it can be different depending on who the consumer is and the overall brand themselves.
Well, I actually had a paint question, but it was really about the system that you described. Although I do have personal questions about the paint. I'll mention those at the break. But it occurred to me that I think it's a great program, but I see one problematic aspect based upon the part of the ship industry that I deal with, which is cruise ships. Mm-hmm. Not myself, I mean, I instrument them. But in any case, all the ones I'm familiar with are trying everything at once.
Yes.
They're not doing one thing at a time. I see them simultaneously worrying about the paint, grinding off what seemed to be near invisible place between the welds between the plates, putting baffles over the bow thrusters, putting little bilge keels in and putting ALS systems in all at the same time.
Yes.
And yet your system depended upon doing the thing one at a time.
Yes. Well, the interesting thing is, particularly about the cruise industry, they were the very first adopters of fount-release coatings, and because they really wanted to go green. So they've been really the instrumenters of it. For them, in terms of when we speak to Carnival and all these cruise lines, early on, their power plants provide power for the whole ship, so they didn't know what was going to the engines and what was going to the hotel side. And now that they've installed all these monitoring programs, so they are getting a better feel on that. But we do have one cruise ship that has just converted to Intersleek, and they will go into the carbon credit program for Holland America line. So they do have the ability to do it. They just need to have the data and information.
Hi, I just have a question for Joe on hybrid batteries. You didn't really talk about the life cycle of the battery and what happens after that battery is now going to a landfill or whatever the protocol is for replacing the battery.
Sure. The life cycle of lithium-ion batteries, it depends on the technology, and it's a very changing technology right now. The life cycle you can get sometimes can be 7 to 10 times as long as a conventional battery, but I'm not sure as far as what happens in the afterlife and the recycling of it. I think it's still fairly new, and most of the cores cannot be reused as far as what I understand, but maybe they will find another purpose for them.
Now, while I know I can rant, I'm almost done. I want to praise the contribution about your critical analysis of the drivetrain, fads in certain quarters. It really needs to be said again and again. Certain drivetrain technologies are only useful for a certain particular, often quite narrow application.
Yes.
There might be cross benefits. Some of the stuff, simply the philosophy of what you're trying to do here. Some of the stuff really makes not much sense, as you point out. In certain areas, yes, other areas not at all. So the more such sober assessment, the better. And I wish we'd had much more of that discussion going on. In terms of, you mentioned the big prop, four propellers versus 2 and all this. I think when the QE2 was repowered, they put in, 11 generator sets? And like 3 or 4 of them run the elevators and the magic water fingers, Whirlpool and all this stuff, and a few of them run the propulsion system. They switch on and off gen sets to power the main propulsion or not. Hybrid so-called locomotives and shunting yards at Burlington Northern and all that, they have 3 or 4 diesel engines there, but only run 1 or 2 depending on how much power they need. So there's an awful lot of smart things like that, but not much with batteries. And so I applaud you, keep being very critical and advise your clients, there really is no particular rainbow to be had here. This is pretty much nuts and bolts. Thank you.
Yes.
Good question from Dean Corliss here. Get the microphone. Yep. 1 second. Here we go.
This is to Joe. We've had quite a bit of discussion about hybrids over Greenbolt 1 and 2, and you were talking about the fact that for the issue of smaller vessels. But what we've been thinking about and discussing is research vessels in the 180 to 190 foot range using a hybrid similar to the Foss work. So do you have some comments or ideas on the feasibility or perhaps the future feasibility of using hybrid for a vessel of that size, let's say 150 to 200 feet for research possibilities?
Sure. I think there's 2 technologies that I would recommend as potentially proposing the most benefit. Number one, the diesel electric system could work, and I would certainly recommend that a dual fuel propulsion system be considered, one that can operate on both LNG and diesel, depending on where you're operating. The beauty of that is if LNG, that bunkering facility is not available, you can use conventional diesel. So you're green most of the time. And so that's a great benefit to consider. Secondly, I'd also really explore these power take-in transmissions with the hybrid gearboxes. I think it's a great solution to really smartly size the propulsion system. That's the one thing is research vessels in particular. You need the power only at certain times to get to the site, and then you're loitering or running at very slow speeds. And so you don't need those big engines, and it's just a big waste potentially. And so I would say use those power take-ins, downsize the engines, and supplement when you're underway.
Question back?
Yes, Professor Nixon. I was wondering, it seems that fiberglass boats and disassembling them can be fun. Why not make a recreation, like monster trucks, crushing them and so forth, a recreation for recreational vehicles?
There are some worker safety issues that might be problematic.
I was wondering also if it's possible that the reason the French seem to be leading the charge in recycling or disposing of fiberglass boats is that so many of them that seem to come over here seem to disassemble themselves at sea.
I have no comment on the product liability issues being faced by several French manufacturers.
Thank you very much.
That's a good American vote there, mine.
We had one more.
Built in Warren, Rhode Island. Sure.
Hi, Doug Bruce at Oregon State University. Also for Professor Nixon, two quick questions about the boats. One is you quoted the Rhode Island number. Do you have an estimate for total U.S. derelict boats need to be recycled?
Evan?
So we know for the period of 2003 to 2012, roughly 2.1 million fiberglass.
2.1 million. One of those is a 16-foot runabout I have in a barn in Pennsylvania. My solution was to give it to a friend. And then the other question is, are there any manufacturers? Some of these boat companies have been around a long time. Do you know of any manufacturer that says, hey, we'll take back our boat? If you've got a boat with our label on it, bring it back.
Interestingly, the president of Beneteau US is I think the leader in what's called Sail America, the industry group that supports sailing in the United States, and we've explored the issue with him of providing a trade-in scrap value for a Beneteau model being traded in for a new Beneteau. So yes, manufacturers are interested in seeing boats being returned and are willing to talk about some sort of credit system. The J-boat folks know that they want to sell new boats. They're tired of me fixing up my 1983 boat. You fixing up your 1976 boat because 74 because it's bad for the new boat business. And that's one of the problems with fiberglass is that if you do take care of it, it will last indefinitely. And then eventually you get to an owner who doesn't take care of it and she falls apart. But the reluctance has been right now, none of the manufacturers are making a lot of money. The total world sales in large boats is still quite depressed. It has not really recovered after the recession. Stunningly low number, except in the market you're in, where you're selling lots of the super yachts, but in that smaller, in that 35 to 45 foot range, there's hundreds sold, period. Yes, John?
Yes, I know that one of the problems they were having in South Carolina was jurisdictional problems with them, where the derelict boats in the waterways were the responsibility of the Coast Guard and not the local. So it was who could even get rid of them. Mm-hmm. And they began to try to address them, but then you got to go through the quagmire of the federal law, reconcile it with the state law, and read the local law. There was a real problem with that, so the local community could be, basically with the collapse of the market in the last 3 or 4 years, almost every stream you can go to in South Carolina is loaded with derelicts. And the locals will try to get rid of them, and they can't get rid of them because the Coast Guard has jurisdiction.
We have, the problem is bad enough in this state that $1 a year was attached to boat registration fees to fund a marine debris fund, which would enable harbor masters to apply for funding to remove large objects that have washed up on their shore, like boats. Washington has done the same thing because of the large number of abandoned boats there. Florida has yet to do it, but they're actively interested in coming up with a funding mechanism because it's such an easy place for people to abandon their boats and they just walk away. It's apparently common knowledge what you have to do to scrape the hull identification number off the stern, and the paper trail doesn't exist, and it often is left up to either the local community or the state. And that's why I think the solution will ultimately be a state-by-state one, but perhaps with some federal guidelines. For example, OSHA will get interested when we undertake a new activity called boat dismantling. So I think there will be uniform national standards for how carefully you have to do this so people don't get killed doing it. But then I think whether or not you turn it into, some communities do have incinerators, and if they can run safely with this substance in it, I think waste to energy is a smart way to deal with this problem. There are only so many trash can holders you can make with the millions of boats we have to grind up. And so I think that's, frankly, a better use. Or in the insulation industry, which so far has expressed, I've called, I've written, they don't return my calls, they don't return my emails, they're not interested in using a dirty, used product that doesn't have perfect, consistent quality. It'll be more of a manufacturing challenge. They're concerned about their own warranties. How can they offer a new product warranty on one with that combination of old and new? So there are a lot of technical challenges in taking that kind of a product and making it into a useful substance again. Other questions? Yes?
One more quick question. The lady from Carnival, forgive me for not remembering your name. You were talking about the cruise ships going into small communities and being conscious of not taking on water from those communities where it may not be easily available. Have you looked at using larger water makers and actually supplying water to those communities?
I can't personally speak on behalf of that because I'm not sure. I know we do have a large R&D department as well as a sustainability group that focuses on that. I personally focus on the environmental policy aspect, but I'm hoping they have. And if they haven't, that's something I'll bring to their attention. So
Right.
thank you very much.
Yeah, we did a project for an owner in the South Pacific, and in his previous boat, he didn't like the fact that he was sort of the big boat showed up in the harbor, and there was always this sort of social wall between himself and the local community. And on the last boat, he put in about 10 times the water capacity he needed in his water makers. So when he pulled into a small island, he would actually offload large volumes of water to the community, and all of a sudden he became the waterman. And it was a nice little shift and easy to do.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll pass on that information. Thank you.
Speaking of water, I have a question for you, Aubrey, as well. 11th Hour Racing has gone on a quest to make sure that no sailboat race goes on in this country or in the world where there are single-use water bottles. What's Carnival's policy on individual water bottles on board your fleet of ships? I'm not able to answer that fully. I know, depending on the brand, they may handle it differently. But I know that what we're doing is we provide filtered water, and it actually comes through spigots that are based all over the ship, so that they use reusable. If they bring their own water bottles on board, there's also ones that can be sold that are reused, as well as the cups that are reused throughout the ship. So none of it is immediately disposed of. And I know I can speak on behalf of Carnival Cruise Lines. They actually have it set up now where none of the trash is personally disposed of by the guests themselves. So when you go to the eating areas or the buffets, everything you leave on your tray is specifically disposed of by personnel to ensure that it's disposed of correctly, as well as everything is recycled in the correct bins and everything, just to ensure that those on board are not left to figure out how to recycle on their own. Makes it much easier. Okay. We've got time for one more question, I think. If there's anybody else? Yes? Ben?
For Carnival again, I was talking to the environmental vice president years ago, and he told me that on some Carnival cruise ships, they make 35,000 gallons of sewage a day. and they take water on at 25 parts per million total suspended solids from the city or wherever they take on water, but they tertiary treat it and discharge it at 5 parts per million. So they can dump it. Why even dump it? I mean, you could, I know it sounds gross, but you could actually drink that effluent, but they could give that right back to the, to the city, and it's cleaner than what they got from the city. It's just an interesting comment.
Yes. Again, I will provide what I personally know about it, which is not from the technical side. I know that they have been doing a lot of R&D to look into systems that can be put on board to help with the filtration of those different types of waste, as well as one thing we pride ourselves on is ensuring that we dispose of it correctly. We also have many systems that are currently on board to deal with the wastewater, the gray water, the black water, all of that, and the ability to reuse much of it, as much of it as can be done in a healthy manner. So that's one concept that is very much a focus for all of our brands across our corporation.
Probably wouldn't be a great marketing tool for them. Carnival, well, you can drink your own,
Well, I'd like to thank the speakers and also Dennis for the very useful and interesting Q&A period.